Hi, I'm Beth with American Patchwork and Quilting, and welcome to another tips video for the Blast from the Past Mystery Sampler. This month we're releasing two blocks, blocks 24 and 25, and these both use foundation paper piecing. Paper piecing is a great way to get really precise piecing and also lets you get shapes that would be really difficult to achieve with traditional piecing. I love how these blocks turned out. So this technique definitely takes a little bit of practice, but I will show you how to make block 24 and give you some tips along the way. First, make sure you print your patterns at actual size or 100%. Check the sizing box on the printout. So you can use paper that's specifically made for foundation paper piecing, or I've found that this thin copy paper works great as well. Next, you'll want to set up a station by your sewing machine so that you can cut and press. This technique involves a lot of stitching, trimming, and pressing on repeat. So if you don't have a station like this, you'll be getting up and down a lot. You also want to shorten your stitch length to about 1.5 millimeters. This will help perforate the paper more, so it will tear away more easily, and also with the tighter stitching, that will help prevent distortion or ripping those stitches out when you take the paper off. When you cut out your pattern, don't cut on the dashed line. Cut a little bit away from the dashed line. That is going to be our trim line at the end, so you don't want to cut on that quite yet. If you'd like to keep your fabric straight, you can write right on the pattern which colors are in which sections, and we're going to be sewing with the pattern facing up so that we can see the stitching lines, and then the fabric is going to be on the bottom. So our first piece is going to go with the wrong side underneath, and it's facing up, so facing the pattern. And what we're doing is we're filling this first space. So you want to make sure that your piece of fabric is fully covering the space plus the dashed lines, and you want at least a 1/4 inch on this seam line too. So if you can kind of hold it up to the light a little bit, that will allow you to see where that shadow is, and if you need to adjust this at all, you can have it on there really any way that you need to have it to fit, and just make sure that it is fully covering that shape. So this is a pretty generous size piece, so we can fit it on here multiple ways, but that is going to give us quite a bit of seam allowance, which is fine. We'll trim that off later, and everything else looks fully covered, so that looks good. Now we're going to add our piece 2. So this is going to go with right sides facing our piece 1. And then sometimes this is a little hard to kind of picture. Where is this going to flip over? Is that fully going to cover that piece? So what you can do is put a pin on that seam line, that's the line between 1 and 2, and then flip that over. So that's just kind of previewing your seam. Flip that back so that you can see if that's going to fully cover piece 2. And you want a little bit extra here. It's a little scant. I'm not sure if you can see that with the shadow. So I would adjust this a little bit, but it's going all the way to the edge, which is great. So I would take the pin out and maybe just adjust this down a little bit so that we have a little bit more extra on the end. And if you don't want to pin, you can also just kind of hold it and fold it. And you'll get used to doing this, but it is a little tricky at first. Okay, I think that's going to be good. So I'm going to put a pin in to hold that, and I'm just putting it just on this section. I don't want to put it on my seam line. And now we're going to stitch between shapes 1 and 2 on this line. You want to make sure your stitching line goes through the whole piece, so you want to start beyond the dashed line, go all the way through the line, and then end past the dashed line on the other side. I also have my laser light on because this is really helpful to stay on the line. We've stitched this down, and now we're going to fold on the stitching line and trim. Now just be careful with this. I've definitely done this before where I've just folded it here and cut that off, and then I just cut off the pieces that I was trying to add. So you're folding it toward the piece you just added. So fold it toward one, and then you can see we have some extra here that we need to trim off. So you can use your regular ruler, or if you are doing a lot of paper piecing, you might want one of these add a quarter rulers. It's got a little lip that butts up right against that fold and makes it really nice and easy to trim. So just trim that extra off. Then now open that back up, and then we are going to press this toward the piece number 2 that we just added. So I'm pressing my piece, and you don't want to use steam for this because it can curl or warp that paper. Now I'll add piece 3. That is my tan again. And so basically this is the stitching line, so we're going to line it up approximately like that, but on the back. It's a little harder to see the shadow through when you have the second piece here, so if you have a light box, that can really help. All right, I'm going to do my preview fold here. Okay, so now I'm going to see this is not going to be long enough. It's not going to go all the way to the edge. So let me try turning it. And it's going to be a little more like that angle. Okay, now I can see that that will fully cover this piece. So I think we are good with that placement. So I will go ahead and put a pin in there, and now I'm stitching between shapes 2 and 3, so on this line. This line doesn't go all the way to the edge of our unit, so I like to start at the intersection with a tacking stitch, and this way I can get it right exactly at that intersection. I can use my hand wheel, add a little tacking stitch, and then I can continue my stitching. Again, go all the way past the dotted line on this end, pull my pin out, and now I'm going to fold toward shape 2. So on that stitching line I just did, there is a little extra stitching here, so you can just tear that. And then we're going to trim off all of this excess. Again, so we're trimming to 1/4 inch. I've got this add a quarter ruler, but you can use a regular ruler as well. And then we will press that way. As I add my pieces, I find it helpful to repeat stitch, fold, trim, press. So that way I don't forget the order of my steps. Now we're going to add piece 4. This one is a triangle, so it can be a little bit tricky to determine which way this is going to go on here. It's going to cover that part, and that will be basically the seam. So that's kind of helpful to kind of get an idea of where that is exactly going, which direction that triangle is going, and then you can adjust as needed until that is going to cover that whole shape. Once all the pieces are added, you'll end up with kind of this crazy looking piece. So you want to trim the entire thing to the dotted lines. This is half of the block, so you'll repeat to make the other half using the second pattern. So once you have both of those ready and you're ready to put your block together, then you'll need to remove the paper. So you can fold along the stitching lines and then just gently tear the paper away. This is my favorite part of the process. I don't know, there's something just so satisfying about tearing the paper off. If you get little pieces that kind of are stuck in the stitching, you can use a tweezers to remove those. Fingernails are also very helpful for this part. So So I wanted to show this unit because it is an example of what happens if you don't get your fabric fully covering the shape that you're supposed to. So this didn't go all the way to the dashed line, so I'm missing a little chunk here on the edge. So if you're having trouble with this, I would suggest cutting your pieces a little more oversized just to make sure you're fully covering those shapes. Here are the 2 completed blocks using the Clover Blossom Farm collection by Kansas Troubles Quilters for Moda Fabrics. I love the rich colors on this line. I do think it's a little easier for this technique to use non-directional prints. It can be hard to visualize how those are going to end up in the block and keep it consistent if that's something that you care about. Paper piecing definitely requires practice as it's a totally different way of making quilt blocks, but the results are amazing. When you finish sewing your blocks, please share them with us in our private Facebook group or on Instagram with the hashtag APQ Blast from the Past. Happy sewing!